Okay, so we're at the end of the fight, and honestly, this is my only issue with the scene.
Talking about, bro?
You gotta put the Westbrook meme
Bro,
on, yo.
what are you talking about, man?
This strange desire Ichigo has to have a fair fight with Ulquiorra seems to come out of nowhere.
And then Ichigo was so butthurt about it, and I understand, but even Uryu was just like, not like, I can't believe you, Ichigo. I can't believe you done this to me. Like,
The idea that he's doing it for the sport of it, this sense of duty that he doesn't want to win, quote, this way, is a bizarre proposition to me.
I guess we have to talk about this, huh? Since its release during the late 2000s, Ichigo's fight with Ulquiorra has been very controversial, despite also being extremely well liked. One moment in particular has stood out, prompting many people to yell at the clouds, claiming character assassination. This page, where, after losing control of himself and delivering a killing blow to Ulquiorra, Ichigo declares, "I didn't want to win like this." A lot of people read that and thought it was inconsistent with Ichigo's previous characterization of somebody who would do anything to protect what's important to him. However, I'm here to argue that it's not only perfectly consistent, but also really good and meaningful. Of course, none of these takes are new, and in case you don't want to watch this whole long ass video about a character you may or may not be that invested in, here's the short version. During his fight with Byakuya, Ichigo Kurosaki was consumed by his hollow powers, and thus compromising his way of winning. To step on Byakuya's pride and make him admit that he was wrong, he rejected said hollow powers, thereby gaining Byakuya's respect. Byakuya then, by acknowledging Ichigo, due to his unwavering resolve, decided to resolve this in a final attack, and after Ichigo won that exchange, Byakuya declared defeat. While against Ulquiorra, he gives into his hollow, and the hollow ends up killing Ulquiorra, robbing Ichigo of achieving the win by himself in the way he wanted, unlike with Byakuya. There is a very clear parallel being drawn here, that's the entire point of the scene. And sure, I could sum up the whole thing in 35 seconds or something, but this fight deserves better. So let's start from the top. Hi, my name is Askin, a Ryoku scholar, and I'm here to talk with you about Ichigo Kurosaki's tragic victory. Part 1. He Who Protects. Before anything else, we need to get down to brass tacks and establish what is Ichigo's driving force in the first place, and why so many people think that Ulquiorra moment contradicts that. Ichigo Kurosaki loved his mom, and failing to protect her during a rainy day scarred him for the rest of his goddamn life. He got the naming of his name from his dad before, and even went to get stronger for the purpose of protecting people, but that loss really solidified his resolve, and painted his way of thinking going forward. And his desire is not fair or simple at all. For example, to help Shad, he would gladly fight 5 punks at once. He knows he's strong to take them on, and so he doesn't care about unequal matchups. And when the opposite is true, when he's weak and he needs help, he also takes it. Against the likes of Aizen, for example, he would, on multiple occasions, team up. Hell, he would be okay with people like Renji using underhanded moves to win. So really, the common idea of a fair fight, one-on-one, no underhanded tactics, doesn't really appear to apply to Ichigo. So what the hell is he talking about when he says he wants a fair fight? I think the confusion comes from people who think this far and then conclude this is just an inconsistency. But looking at Ichigo's fights as a whole, not just specific parts that you have to remember for 400 chapters ago, you can see some narratives emerge, and the actual context of the scene begins to become transparent. But to truly understand the meaning of that moment, we can't separate it from the arc that it's from, and we can't separate the arc from the arc that it parallels in many ways. So first, before we're talking about Ichigo vs Ulquiorra, we gotta talk about Arrancar. And to talk about Arrancar, we gotta talk about Part 2, Soul Society. Ichigo has 3 main fights in Soul Society that get called back to directly in Arrancar. His fight with Ikkaku, called back with Dordoni, his fight with Kenpachi, called back with Grimjaw, and of course, his final fight with Byakuya that gets called back with Ulquiorra. So let's look at some choice moments from this fight and see where those patterns of narrative that I talked about start to emerge. Against Ikaku, Ichigo shows the fruits of his training and the main theme for this arc resolves to stand by what you want in your beliefs, and by doing so, he forces Ikaku to acknowledge him and thus achieves victory. And an important thing to note is that despite attacking Ikaku even after he was severely damaged, Ichigo takes great pains to not kill him, going out of his way to save his life, using his very own Sanpakto for that purpose. This is not a new idea, of course, but also not extremely pervasive. Not every shonen protagonist is anti-killing. Saint Seiya, a manga Kubo has said is one of his inspirations, for example, has 4 of its 5 main characters completely fine with killing people in combat, and yet Ichigo does not. This is relevant because it will be a main thing with Ichigo both in this arc and Arrancar. He does not want to kill people. Even as this no killing policy starts conflicting with his desire to protect, and of course, this will be called out as it happens, as the naivete it is. However, during the Soul Society arc, Ichigo will prevail in part due to holding on to this naivete and way of thinking. His fight against Kenpachi starts once again with Ichigo having a test of will, and once he passes it, he damages Kenpachi for the first time, forcing him to actually start taking him seriously and fight for real. However, Ichigo underestimates Kenpachi, not realizing that Kenpachi's relationship with his sword is very similar to the one Ichigo has. And so, he gets comically defeated, completely low-diffed, as they say. And so, as he is seemingly defeated, we come to a very important scene, both to this fight and arc, and moving forwards as well. After being completely crushed by Kenpachi, Ichigo is visited by Old Man Zangetsu and is asked a very simple question by him. Do you want to win, or do you want to live? Ichigo's answer is, in turn, just as simple. Fighting by its own sake is meaningless. Survival itself is meaningless. I want to win. And yet, despite the fact that these words came from Ichigo's heart, at one of his lowest moments in the arc, he would not understand the true weight of his own words until far later. Still, by fighting against his own Sanpakto and learning to appreciate Zangetsu more, he gains power and inner conviction again. And so he can fight Kenpachi on equal ground. However, he is baffled that Kenpachi will be fine fighting to the death and even revel in the violence that is happening. Because despite his own words, Ichigo doesn't actually want to fight and die. Ichigo lacks an understanding of himself, which will be the catalyst for future developments. But continuing in the context of Soul Society, Ichigo fights to save and protect those close to him. So, as his actions show, he does not want to die, and he does not want to kill either. But despite this fact, and with how much ferocity he fights, he will continue doubling down this no-killing policy. Not in the case of Kenpachi, of course, that was a double KO. But as I said before, he heals Ikaku. I'm not going to mention it because it's not very relevant to this analysis, but in his fight with Renji, he elects to not confirm his death either, and said he would rather not fight to the death with Kenpachi. And during the climax of Soul Society, he elects to not harm the vice captains and had a chance to kill Byakuya right at the start of the fight, which would give him a very good chance to make a run for it with his allies to protect them. And yet, he does not do that. Byakuya asks him why, and he does not respond directly. But you can see, via his words and actions, the actual reasons why he did that. You get a very clear picture. Avoiding killing blows multiple times, refusing help from his hollow powers just because they are more ruthless than he is, etc. Alongside Ichigo's own words, saying that he is here to step on Byakuya's pride, to destroy his devotion to Soul Society and make him admit that killing Rukia is out of the question. He is here not to kill Byakuya, but to make him admit that he's wrong, that the way he thinks is mistaken, and he can't do that by killing Byakuya. And of course, he also wants to win to protect and win for its own sake, though he does not acknowledge it yet. But an interesting thing comes right before his hollow takeover. He repeats the same words he said to Old Man Zangetsu in the Kenpachi fight, however, once again at a low point. And now the quote continues on a little bit more. Just fighting is meaningless. Just survival itself is meaningless. I have to win. No, I want to win. And so, as he finally says the very same words as his fight with Kenpachi, he's consumed by his hollow powers. Those powers who want to protect even at the cost of killing people. They will even revel in that fact. However, he will reject his hollow powers once more, and by rejecting them, he gains Byakuya's respect. In this instance, Ichigo holding to his convictions despite his own desires contradicting him is portrayed as childish and immature, but far more valid than Byakuya's surrender to the rules of society, beaten down by its systems and history. And so, after they clash swords one last time, Byakuya's sword is reduced to petals, and so he concedes and goes away. But there is a very interesting thing going on here. Ichigo can barely stand after the last attack, while Byakuya simply shumpos away fine. Ichigo can barely stand, and yet Byakuya can keep going. In terms of physical ability, Byakuya could try and kill Ichigo right now and probably succeed. And yet, Byakuya declares defeat, because this fight was not purely physical, but one of ideas, as Ichigo's very words and actions have portrayed. And Ichigo on some level also knows this. After all, he accepts Byakuya's surrender and declares himself the victor, despite, being unable to move and finish the fight himself. As opposed to, for example, his first fight with Grinjaw, where a very similar situation happens. He's incapacitated, he can't move, and his opponent is going away. However, he demands his opponent stay so they can resolve the fight. Ichigo wants to win, but to win for Ichigo is not living, it's not just surviving, it's defeating your opponent, not merely physically, but also mentally. And to do so, it involves not killing them. He was, in fact, so anti-killing them that he rejected his own powers when they became more ruthless and willing to kill to protect. That's Ichigo's moral compass right now, at the end of the Soul Society arc. And with that out of the way, I say this. The entire Arrancar saga for Ichigo is a deconstruction and critique of this exact mindset. So let's get to it. Part 3. Arrancar. It's stressed again and again during the Arrancar saga that Ichigo is naive. And while said naivete is the perfect foil to critique Soul Society's unchanging mindless obedience, it would not be enough moving forward. This arc is defined by the Visors, Shinigamis with hollow powers, and Arrancar, hollows with Shinigami powers. Things aren't so black and white anymore, and Ichigo will resist that change. He sees the hollow mass as a necessary evil that he has to suppress and control and diminish out of himself. During his training, for example, he only concedes a tiny amount to his mask, but he does in fact have instinct, but no more than that. And failing to keep in mind the very words said to him here will come back to bite him in the ass way later. After he goes into Ecomundo, he has his fight against Dordoni, which, as we said before, parallels his fight with Ikkaku. Against Ikkaku, Ichigo made him acknowledge his abilities and defeated Ikkaku via that acknowledgement. Against Dordoni, Dordoni forced Ichigo to acknowledge his abilities and thus was defeated by Ichigo after he went serious and put on the mask. And this will be the main thing here. Ichigo will be challenged by a hollow's ideals, and concede a little bit to said ideals, and by that concession achieve victory. Instead of sticking to his ideas and winning, which characterizes his fights in Soul Society, he will be characterized by giving in into his opponent's ideals a little bit in Arrancar. Dordoni's final monologue sets the stage for Ichigo's journey in his arc moving forwards. His kindness to heal enemies and refuse to kill will be taken advantage of. He needs to leave behind his chocolate sweetness and become a demon who protects if he is ever to defeat the Espada and rescue Orihime. Ichigo will resist that with every fiber of his body. He will fight against this outcome. Against Grimjaw, for example, which parallels his fight with Kenpachi, Ichigo fights the primal fear that he is just like the ones he's fighting, in part because Orihime is scared of him. But even after she takes another step in her arc, realizing that whatever monster Ichigo turns into, it will be to help save her, It only leads to Ichigo finally understanding the instincts that both Kenpachi and Grimjaw talked about exist in him as well, and that he does in fact have desires. But it does not lead to a reconciliation with his hollow, or an examination of where that instinct comes from. Still, another step was taken in the journey, another concession was made to his hollow powers. And so, via that concession, he gains a little bit of a greater understanding and defeats Grimjaw. In the physical sense, of course, but also emotionally as well. He spares him and rebukes his ideology, even moving to protect him from Ulquiorra later. This is clearly a complete moral and physical victory for Ichigo. Of course, then the captains show up to pay off their own plot lines and show Ichigo that his black and white idea of, well, they weren't willing to go with me right at the beginning, therefore they're not coming at all, was wrong-headed. But after that, we have the breaking point of Ichigo's journey in this arc, his fight with Ulquiorra. Now, both Soul Society and Arrancar have primed us with expectations for this fight. The parallel this fight has with the fight against Byakuya, and the way the fights in Arrancar have progressed so far alongside Ulquiorra, Orihime's and Ichigo's character arcs have primed us to think of how this fight will go. Ichigo will start losing, make a concession to his hollow powers, gain a greater understanding of himself, and via that understanding achieve victory. And since Ulquiorra's character arc is about understanding what the hell a heart is and what it means to be human, Ichigo giving in a little bit of his hollow powers will be contrasted by Ulquiorra becoming a bit more human, understanding what the heart is. And therefore, Ulquiorra will become a bit weaker, and Ichigo will become a bit stronger, and so Ichigo will beat Ulquiorra, just like the fight against Byakuya, where Ichigo won the moral philosophical battle. Even if he didn't win completely the physical one, they still somewhat follow from each other. However, this fight does not go like that. All the priming we got to this moment from those last 20 to 30 volumes will pay off right here, right now. So let's talk about the fight that defines Ichigo moving forward. Part 4. Ulquiorra versus Ichigo. We are finally here. Well, okay. The fight starts normal enough, you know. Great choreography, reestablishing the conflict we're going to have. Because, you know, we've been away from Ichigo for like 25 chapters, aka like 3 volumes. But even at the points where Yami and Nuryu enter and involve themselves in the scuffle, things aren't really escalating. They only really escalate once Ichigo decides to hollowfy and almost breaks Ulquiorra's sword, something that will prevent him from releasing, and that makes him break the Las Noches company and go to the lonely line of Hueco Mundo above Las Noches. And then Ulquiorra's release is a torrent of black rain upon Ichigo. And if you were paying attention to the symbols of the story at all, this fact should make you very worried. I mean, rain for Ichigo has been a constant reminder of his greatest failures. First, to save his mother, then failing to avenge her, then failing to protect Rukia. And now, as rain falls on him once again, we, the readers, are supposed to be filled with dread for what's about to come. What ensues is an absolute beatdown by Ulquiorra, complete with him revealing a second transformation. After a particular moment of Ichigo touches his nerves, where he declares it doesn't matter how much stronger he is, he has to beat him anyway. What I need to direct your attention to is an exchange that happens after Ulquiorra beats on Ichigo a little bit during Segunda Etapa. You're challenging an enemy you can't possibly defeat. Your belief in your own ability to win is beyond my comprehension. If this is what you people call heart, it's more a liability than a strength. For having a heart, you will pay the ultimate price. And Ichigo's response is, I'm not fighting because I think I can win, I'm fighting because I have to win. Now, if you remember, this is exactly the thing he says right before his hollow takes over in the fight against Byakuya. And alongside everything that has happened so far, and the fact that Orihime and Ishida are going up there with ominous narration by Ishida that that's going to be a horrible mistake, you should, as an attentive reader, be filled with the utmost dread about what's going to happen. Because when Ichigo gets stabbed in the heart at the end of this chapter, you should know what's coming. Not because Ichigo is going to stay dead. No. You know exactly what's going to happen. Because you remember something that Ichigo himself failed to remember. All the way from volume 25. The words said by him, by his own inner spirit. Orihime's cries for help aren't the last straw, of course. Ichigo stands back up again, consumed by his desire to protect, but this time controlled by instinct. He has finally become a demon to protect. This was basically the inevitable outcome of this arc. However, what's compelling about it is that Ichigo was fighting this the entire arc. No, even before that, really. This fight against instinct is started in his battle with Byakuya. So it's only fitting that it came to a breaking point right here in the fight that parallels the fight with Byakuya so much. But regardless, despite his best efforts, Greenjaw was right, Lord Donnie was right, White Ichigo was right. And hell, in a roundabout way, Ulquiorra himself was right too, because by losing heart and becoming a demon, Ichigo gained greater power than even him, was becoming more and more human. And so, as he comes back and sees the destruction he caused, he asks for things to be made right, to be made even, to try and still resolve this. And then afterwards, Ulquiorra starts dying right in front of him from the wounds he inflicted. And so Ichigo screams out, "I didn't want to win like this." And with all we have talked about so far, it's obvious why he didn't. This is the first person he kills for one, and also resulted in him harming his friends, the very things he was risking becoming a demon for. There is no victory here at all for Ichigo. So he grasps at any opportunity, tries to make people cut his legs and arms to make it even. Because that's his sweet naivete. He's desperately holding on to it. Holding on to that simple moralistic view from all the way back at the beginning of the Soul Society arc. But Ichigo himself realizes that it isn't working. And moving forward, for the rest of his arc, Ichigo will start spiraling downwards as his ideals and what he wants to protect come into more and more conflict until he ultimately lets go of one of them at the end of the arc. So basically, yeah, of course he was mad about that. Of course he wanted to have his own arms and legs cut off. Of course he said that. Of course. It's not only meaningful and good for the story moving forward that he did, that those things happen, but it's also like very consistent with his previous characterization. You would in fact be very uncharacteristic if Ichigo just suddenly didn't care about killing people in this one instance. So yes, as a catalyst for future development and a driving force for the rest of this arc, this moment not only makes perfect sense, but it's great, and I love it.
If I had to describe the development of Ichigo Kurosaki from the beginning of the series to the end, and I divided it in two parts, I would for sure have to divide it in pre-Ulquiorra vs Ichigo and post-Ulquiorra vs Ichigo. This is the second act low point, and a change in perspective occurs after this moment, both in Ichigo and his friends. And it also happens with a change in the narrative.
This is also represented in the way setups and payoffs are handled. A lot of setup is put on this fight and the very last fights that Ichigo partakes in the manga. For example, Orihime being a big payoff here. She had her whole journey, her whole arc in the entirety of Society and Arrancar, and then it ended in absolute failure here. And then she's going to spend the rest of the series building herself back up stronger and stronger for it to finally pay off at the very last fight. A very similar thing will happen to Ichigo. This is his lowest point, and he's going to spiral down for the rest of Arrancar, and at the beginning of Fullbring, that he is truly rock bottom, at death's door. And then it somehow is going to keep getting worse, up till he gets his powers back, and finally Society repays him. And following from that, he's going to start building himself up and up and up and up and up and up, When it rains, for example, during Thousand Year Blood War, it's never a rain for Ichigo. It's a rain for Yamamoto and the Soul Society, and then in a flashback, a rain for his parents. Because for current day Ichigo, post Full Brain, post Thousand Year Blood War, he's in the up and up, he's stopping the rain. He's not shackled by it anymore. And with that in mind, that is why I wanted to end the video right here at the end of Ichigo vs Ulquiorra, because it's a very good turning point and a huge payoff. As you can see, there are a lot of things that went into it, and I haven't even talked about all of it really. I'm just talking about the very basic mechanics of the fight and Ichigo's mindset. I haven't even talked about the character arcs involved, aside from a surface level reading, you know, and alongside other things. So really, what I'm trying to say is there will probably be another Ichigo video. One that is about this long again, covering the rest of his journey up to the end of the series. Because I find it compelling. I find it just inspirational and raw. And that's what it needs to be good. And yeah, thank you for watching. Like and subscribe, and see you next time.